Hello there. If this is your first time joining, my name is Audrey, and this is the Fire and Fiber podcast where I talk about all things knitting, thrifting, and the like. Today, I wanted to do a little bit of an informational video about how to read yarn labels and how to decipher yarn. That's the question I get asked a lot in my side job when I work at my local yarn store. So I wanted to break down some of the, hopefully break down some of the mystery surrounding yarn labels. So the first thing I wanted to do is show the various types of fiber or yarn that you might pick up at your local yarn store or online depending, and the way that they are packaged. So these two right here, both from Spin Cycle and my favorite Bear House Knits, these are wound hanks, and this is what you will often see hand-dyed yarns coming in. Hanks are really great for hanging and displaying and shipping, but the challenge is that they have to be woven in a very specific way. Typically you need a yarn winder and a swift, so these aren't really a great option for first-time yarn buyers if they don't have experience or know that they need to be winding it a certain way. You can't just pull from one end and hope for the best. The next one I wanted to talk about, this is what's called a cake. So this is Gadifra Lanamia sock yarn cake, and as you can see, it's spun flat in the round, so it makes this nice cake with a ball band around. And this is one that you can pull either from the center, or when you remove the ball band, you can start from the outside. You'll see a lot of color changing yarns coming in this format, especially like striping or fades, things like that. If you're making socks and you want to make two identical socks, if you have two cakes, it's easy enough to sort of pull off to get the color that you want and start there, or vice versa. So that's a cake. This is a donut. So as you can see, it's a donut shape. So oftentimes you will see mohair and lace and things like that wound in a cake. These are really easy. Again, you can pull from the inside or you can pull from the outside end, whichever you choose. These are great for like stacking in stores and displaying. Honestly, I don't know why any manufacturer doesn't put their yarn in a donut like this, especially when I look at like some of these hanks. Like, these are beautiful, and hanks are wound this way specifically for indie dyers because when they get the yarn, it's typically wound in a hank, and then you unwind it, dye it, and then you can wind it back up. But again, really pretty. Personally, I find kind of challenging for some folks. I also find that sometimes it's hard to read your yarn when you look at, not so much these, like these are pretty solid, but when you look at a color changing yarn, it sometimes can be difficult to know what it's going to look like when it's knit up or crocheted up, whether it's a variegated or what. That can be a little bit difficult to understand, but there are benefits to these, especially if you're looking for assigned pooling yarns or things like that. So anyways, donuts, again, my personal fave. Got some cakes. And then these are just balls of yarn. Like, I don't think that there's necessarily any other word for it. These are two examples of very easy to unwind and navigate, whether you're pulling, again, from the center or your outside thread. These, again, are really easy to stack if you are looking at storing. But anyways, so that is the various shapes and styles with which you will be purchasing fiber, most likely. So as you can see, there is a ton of information on the labels or the ball band of yarn. That's not always the case. Sometimes you might have less information, sometimes you might have more, but I wanted to go through how to read this. So we've got the yarn brand, and then the type of yarn you're grabbing, its name. So its name is Lanamia. The manufacturer is Gadifra. It'll also tell you it's made in Tuscany. That's just a little extra. And then it'll tell you, sometimes it'll tell you below. So this one is a merino sock wool. I really wish I had redone my nails before I started this, but wherever you go, there you are. So again, this one has because it's a mass produced or like manufactured yarn as opposed to hand dyed, it's got its little barcode. Again, not always. This one includes information. So they are a no mulesing, animal friendly manufacturer. I'm not going to get into what that is. Google at your own risk. But anyways, so over here we have the content of the yarn. And so it is in what I assume is probably German. Don't hate me. Might be Italian. This is an Italian yarn. I'm not a linguist. So it's got its information in English as well. So this is an 80% virgin wool superwash and a 20% polyamide. So what that means for sock knitters is that superwash is a way that the fiber is treated to help it be more durable and less likely to felt or shrink, especially if it accidentally goes in the wash. I feel like superwash is one of those things among fiber people that is very polarizing. Some people love it, some people hate it. I'm not going to dive into superwash in general, but just to be aware. And then the 20% polyamide is a synthetic that helps it, again, kind of hold its shape a little and be a little bit more durable and less likely to felt. When you have 100% wool, depending on where it's come from and which kind of wool, whether it's like Falkland or merino or Highland or Peruvian, yarn on its own, when it's 100% wool has these little barbs that are not really visible to our naked eye, but when they rub against each other and there's friction, they tend to felt. And so that's why you'll see a lot of sock yarn that has some sort of either superwash component or like a nylon, a polyamide, something else that's a synthetic in order to help prevent that from happening. The next thing you're going to see on your ball, and this is oftentimes on the front as well, like on our wool addicts, is the weight. So sometimes you will see in metric, sometimes you'll see in imperial, and sometimes you'll see both. The challenge, if you are a firebear artist and is that we are often using both metric and imperial measurements for things. So that gets tricky. The only thing I'll say about that is make sure you're paying attention to what your pattern's calling for, what your labels are calling for, the difference between metric and imperial when it comes to your needles or your hooks and all that. So this is a 100-gram cake, which is the equivalent to 390 meters. It's very important to understand that not all yarn is made equally. So even though these are both fingering yarns, for example, these are both sock yarns, this one has 390 meters per 100 grams, and this one has around 400 meters per 100 grams. So even though they might be similar, not all yarns are made equally. And this is why it's important to gauge swatch and double check your measurements that you need for whatever you're making. So the next thing that you're going to see on your label is typically there is a recommended needle size of some sort. So this one is telling us we need about a US size 2 or 3. I'm assuming it's US, but it actually might be a size 2 or 3 millimeter now that I said that. This one is kind of fun because it actually gives you a suggestion. So it says that for 100 grams, you can get about one pair of socks, and I can't quite read that. I think it says about 46 grams per sock. Sometimes designers and manufacturers are nice and they'll put that information on a ball of yarn where it'll say like 3 balls for a scarf or whatever. I often see that in like more mainstream, commercially manufactured yarn, acrylic, things like that. A lot of times on, for example, a Karen cake will have that sort of information. There's also going to be information around a gauge swatch right here. And this one is kind of difficult to see. So maybe I'll grab another one. So here's a good example. This is the Lang yarn wool addict again. So you can see it's giving us a recommendation of a 2.5 to a 3.5 needle size. And then it is saying, this one's kind of cool. So it gives you a bit more information on what you can make with a ball. So it's saying 400 for female, I think, and then 500 grams for male. I'm assuming that's for sweaters. And then it says 10 years, which I would take to think like a 10-year-old sweater would need on average 300 grams. It's saying for sock sizes 36 to 46. Remember, this is a European yarn, so they're going by European shoe measurements, not North American. You need about 100 grams. And again, this is a 100-gram ball. So that's kind of cool. This is not standard on every yarn label. You'll see some are more detailed and some are much more minimalistic. So this one just has a square when it's talking about our gauge swatch compared to this gauge square, which is really difficult to see, but it shows you 4 inches or approximately 10 centimeters across. So this is, for the most part, a standard measurement when it comes to gauge swatching across the industry. A yarn manufacturer will typically give you a recommended number of stitches and rows per 4 inches or 10 centimeters based on their recommended needle size. So Again, this is a suggestion. Gauge is really personal and very subjective, but this one actually gives you, it'll say 30 stitches and 42 rows per 4 inches or 10 centimeters. This one doesn't have that. It just says, so what I can read that as 30 stitches across and 41 rows high using a 2.5 or 3.5. Again, because this is a European label, European branding, and there's no imperial measurements on here, I can take that to mean that we're going by needle millimeter size rather than a US size. So just to be warned, this one also is talking about our yarn content. It is buried pretty deeply inside the ball, but it will give you more information. And this one has a few different languages on it. It also says superwash. So those are those two. If we're looking at Sandnes Garn, for example, for the Sisu, it's got Sandnes Garn is the brand, Sisu is the type of yarn, superwash, just giving you extra information. Norwegian yarn since 1888. This one is Norwegian at first, so you have to go down a little bit to find the English. And this one is an 80% wool, 20% nylon. It's produced in Norway by Sandnes Garn. Use wool detergent, avoid wash bag and fabric softener, wash garments separately. 50 grams equals approximately 175 meters. I feel like this is newer. Sandnes Garn used to have a lot less information on their labels, and it was a little bit more challenging. But you can see here, it's giving you, they rate their gauge information a little bit differently. So theirs says 2.5 to 3, 27 stitches per 10 centimeters. I'm not sure what the sweater one says. I'm assuming that that is because it's a superwash and therefore it's appropriate for garments. Again, sometimes you're really spending a lot of time trying to translate some of this. But yeah, there's quite a lot of information on here. The next thing you're going to look at is your washing instructions. So I never know what these symbols mean. I have a chart down next to my washing machine that has all of these, but it tells you how to wash your garment, once it is knit up. The same with here and even on here. These symbols are pretty universal. Again, I don't have them memorized. If you do, that's great. I love that for you. I don't. And then sometimes you'll have more detailed information. So for example, this one will give you instructions on washing in particular. So this is spin cycle and it says hand washing cold, lay flat to dry. For high contrast color work, we recommend blocking to avoid color transfer. That's even more detailed than I've seen on a lot of yarns. So the next thing you're going to look at when you're looking at your label is sometimes it'll tell you what weight or category your yarn is. There is a way to tell if it isn't written on there, but this one is nice. It says sport weight. This from Bear House Knits, it'll tell you the weight is fingering. Again, that is just a general guideline, which means that on average, it fits into that category based on the number of WPI, which is wraps per inch. So if you take an inch ruler and you wrap the yarn around to along an inch, it'll give you an approximation of how many wraps it takes to make an inch. Again, this is based on tension, fiber, how the yarn is spun, all sorts of things, and of course, human error. The other way to tell what weight your yarn is that typically yarn will fall into a certain range per 100 grams. So typically, if you have a sock fingering weight yarn, it will give you around 400 meters or 400 yards, 420 yards, depending, per 100 grams. So for example, this one, these are all sock yarns, by the way, so I kind of cheated. So this one will tell you 100 grams, 400 meters. So you can look and say like, okay, I know that I'm going to have approximately that many stitches per 4 inches with that needle. It's probably a sock yarn. Some of them will say sock wool or fingering weight. There's no standard. There's no standard for yarn labels. So we've looked at our meterage or our weight of yarn, the fiber content, where it's come from, some care instructions depending. The next thing we're going to want to look at is our colors. So it's very important that if you are knitting a garment, whether it's socks or anything else, and you need more than one ball, hank, cake, skein, whatever, of the same yarn, that you are going to need the same dye lot. So what does that mean? Every label will typically give you either a name of the colorway. This one is Orange Shirt Day Sock Set. or a number. When I'm looking at my label, I can see a few things. It will tell me the color and the lot. Skein, again, this is written in Norwegian, so it's a little bit difficult. But if I'm looking at, let's look at the Figalana or Weta, for example. It tells me, this is a Peruvian yarn. I need to get that glare off of there. But it tells me this is color 809. It does have a name, but they don't print it on the label. And then it's going to tell me my lot number, which is 368628. So it's very important that if I'm making anything that has more than one of a same color, I need to get them all from the same dye lot. And the reason being is that even with manufactured yarn like this, not hand-dyed, but actual manufactured yarn, they have lots because it does not matter how careful someone is when they are adding the dye, there is always room for error. So things that could influence dye lot could be the temperature, the time of year, the water pH, the humidity, human error, all sorts of things. When fiber comes to the manufacturer, it's typically all processed at the same time, so that if you are getting 5 balls from this particular dye lot, you know that they're all going to be the same. There is nothing worse than knitting a garment and you change colors or you start a new ball, and even though they look the same in the store when you're holding them, you can very clearly see a demarcation line where you have added in a different dye lot. It is the most aggravating thing in the world. And so that's really important when you're purchasing yarn, is to make sure that you have matching dye lots. There are ways to knit a garment using different dye lots, and I'm not going to get into that, but overall my suggestion is making sure that you have the same lot number for every single ball, donut, cake, whatever you're buying. So some of them are hand printed or stamped like this. Some of them are typed up. This one in particular, I don't think has a dye lot. No, it doesn't. And that's okay. Sometimes you won't get that, especially with hand dyed or small batch yarns. You're not going to get that. That's part of the joy of hand dyed yarns. And so I think, let's see, we've gone over the name, we've gone over the content, washing or care instructions, our measurements in terms of weight and in terms of gauge, what we can make with it. And really, once you have an understanding of that, you are good to go. I hope you found this video helpful. I know it can be really overwhelming trying to read different ball bands or labels or things like that, especially when a lot of them are not in your written or native tongue. I hope this is helpful for you. Let me know down below in the comments if there's something I missed or something else you had a question on. And I hope you have a lovely day. Thanks.